This is NegotiateX TV.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on the NegotiateX podcast. We are continuing our conversation with Brian Rodriguez. So we actually had Officer Mike Baker on episode 19 of NegotiateX, and he had talked about the importance of that face-to-face communication, and too often we're relying on text messages or emails when the power of getting in front of somebody, he was an LAPD SWAT negotiator, so his ability to see eye to eye with whoever he was negotiating with was extremely important. So I think that obviously paid off in your shoes with this deal as well.
Man, I love that question because one, it's my opinion on the industry, and it's my opinion in people, right? And so and we cut, and it's how you grew up, right? Is how I think I'm going to answer that question. So let's I guess scope it. So with the relationship between agents, right? The buyers and sellers, that's the question, correct? Okay, so real estate's easy. People are crazy. Like black and white. I'm crazy. You guys may not think you're crazy, but I think we're all crazy. But anyway, it's just to just kind of answer that question, black and white, but it's so important. And the other side has to be receptive, right? There's such a pride in sales regardless, right? Whether I'm selling medical devices or I'm selling, construction equipment or whatever the case, you are representing a brand, you're representing yourself, you're representing, high value items, right? And so there's always this ego that's involved. So if the other party is receptive and willing to hear your side, hear your client's side, and really learn, it's funny. I've had so many conversations with other agents. They're like, I'm interested in being humbled, and then you're just like, okay, that's not, I'm not trying to humble you. I'm just trying for us to come and see different sides, right? And if they're not willing to do that, you really can't go nowhere. And it just becomes really objective, right? This is the price. You don't satisfy the price or the terms, then, moving on to the next one. And you have such a tight window, right? Especially residential, it's a lot of frequency, right? Versus commercial, it's not like everyone's buying a 500 unit hotel for 25 million to convert, right? So you have a lot more window to create that relationship. So one, if they're receptive, and two, do they speak that same language, right? Because if they're not at that same level as you and you just overwhelm them, right, it's so hard. So you want to make sure you speak their language because it's still a seller's market. So you don't want to come imposing or overkill, right? And so once they're receptive and once you get the same language or the same frequency with them, the tone, then you can get more effective, and you can, if they're willing to go back to the seller too. That's, I guess, the final part is like, how are they as a professional to go back to their client? Because remember, you were representing the client. And the way real estate works is that the seller compensates the agent, both buyer and seller. So you could think about the seller like, wait a minute, you're not working in my interest. Why are you coming back with more terms, right? So those are those three things. It's like, are they receptive? Can you guys speak the same medium? And then finally, how professional are they? But yeah, I love this stuff. Just getting into this. When you start talking about, I want to go back to the alternatives and leading to threats. And I feel like threats is what makes the drama of real estate, right? Like, I'm not going to buy and I walk, right? Yeah. It's funny you said that. Just a random point, Selling Sunset, right? I don't know if you ever seen that Netflix. Yeah. Yeah, I paid them this thing called Cameo, where they'll send a message on their birthday, and I just sent them, so it was really funny. But anyways, I can get on tangents. But like, in regards to threats, to me, threats are like really childish, And I feel like if you're gonna get to threats, it's because of a stalemate, and it's because or the parties are just irrational, right? They just become really hostile. And another thing about threats, it's really poker face. And so if you're going to threat, you better move forward, because the moment you start with your limp command hand, you know, it's, I mean, you're vulnerable. And in an experience that I've had is that, you know, if you ever threat, make it real, act and send the message. What also I've learned, how to threat, you don't threat like buyer to seller. You threat buyer to atmospheric, to like third party vendor. So for example, like when you threat, hey, I don't think that if we don't get this deal done before the end of the year, I don't think I'm going to be able to buy, because one, I'm not going to reach the 1031 timeline. The interest rates are going to go up. The labor and material shortages are going up. I won't be able to get I can't buy until I get the job, right? So you want to threat using someone else or something else. You never want to say like me. Does that make sense?
I got a question for you, Brian. So, you know, real estate negotiations are obviously multi-party negotiations. So how do you maintain a relationship with the other agent? I mean, and also representing your client, so that, you know, you don't want this just to be a single one-time transaction. You want it to be multiple times that y'all are able to work together in the future. So how important is relationships? Like, what do you do to make sure that, you know, you don't get screwed and you don't screw anyone, kind of, if this is even as important as I think it is?
That's a great question, because I think it goes into something deeper as a professional, because it goes back into, I think you hit it on, Nolan. It's like that agent principal tension. So how are you managing their interests, their emotions, and you're essentially intermediary, right? Would you agree? And so I feel like we're our worst critic. So we may not think that we're effective because we're not moving forward fast enough to get to closing. But in my experience, in managing their interests, their expectations, their emotions, I think it comes into three things. Consistency. And when I say consistency, it's consistency as you as a professional. Because remember, they hired you for who you are, what you demonstrated. And the moment you start deviating from who you are, you start derailing yourself. Because remember, they hired you for who you are and what you have done. And that's both the buyer and seller. And you need to be consistent with that, because why? The buyers and sellers will become emotional. They will become pessimistic. They will get stressed by other factors outside of the deal. And so if you're consistent, you literally double down on your superpower. Does that make sense? So stay consistent, don't let go. Second, is being refreshing. And these are things I just like made up in terms of how I balance that. They're no like, you know, scholarly thing. Yeah, yeah. And so what I've learned is that if you're refreshing, in order to keep effective communication, you need to constantly remind them of their interest, of their end state. It's like, you know, we're in the Army, we're like, yo, man, we got like 10 more miles in this ruck. When we're done, you know what's next. We can go on leave, you know, whatever. You know, I know it's a simple example, but you want to remind them that, hey, when we're done here, we're going to continue your legacy. We're going to take those proceeds and we're going to go get you another asset that's going to provide for, you know, X, Y, and Z. And so if you don't remind them, they'll just get overwhelmed and it's over. And so, and then lastly, I would say is discipline, but it's discipline within endurance, because, you know, not all transactions are like quick and easy. And like the big deal I just did, that was extensive. You know, it was over a year, and usually transactions don't take that long. And so when you're going into this war, right, this campaign, I mean, you got to have endurance, because the experience in totality is overwhelming. And so I always say that there's a big difference between motivation and discipline, right? Motivation will fade. It's a natural human drive that you need to constantly boost your brain to keep going. But within discipline, I mean, you are literally, it's more important than motivation. You're constantly moving in the right direction based on habits. And so if you are disciplined within the transaction, keeping professional, keeping pragmatic, always underwriting, always being ethical, right? Keep that discipline, because the emotions are just going to flare. And the moment you start appealing to their emotions, both buyer and seller, I mean, you're probably gonna end up unethical, or you're gonna end up illegal. Does that make sense? Because the consumer, the buyer and seller, they're not licensed, they don't practice. Yeah, they may buy or sell real estate, but they don't know the law of the land, how the industry works, and what are the real consequences for not disclosing a foundation, because they're like, oh, it's going to end the deal. Like, no, you will disclose because of X, Y, and Z. This law states this. And so it's really those three things: being consistent, being refreshing, and staying disciplined, no matter how long the transaction takes.
Well, we talk about that, Brian. It's a great story. We talk about the application of these 7 elements, right? In it, just to get to the table, right? Just to get to establish the trust, so you understand what the real concerns are. Somebody's not going to do that with you if they don't trust you, if you don't listen, if you're not good at your job, right? You got to demonstrate those things, and then it carries through the execution of the negotiation, all the way into implementation. As well. So, is there more? We have a little more time. I'm sure folks would love to hear.
Oh yeah, I definitely will. I won't mention like any names or whatever, but because the consumer or the viewer can go and research who these people are, but just to be professional. So yeah, I think it's going to be the meat of this, right? And to really taking a huge case study and applying those 7 elements, right? And understanding how this experience I had is just one big negotiation culminating event. And like I said before we came here, I'm so excited that to tell this story with you first. So I think it was like God willing, So I guess I'll say the story, how I got there, and then getting into the contract, right? And so I started commercial real estate during COVID. So probably one of the worst times to just enter a new venture, right? And, that's right. It's like an IED just come at you. And it was just so I started, and I'm a big whale. I call it Moby Dickin'. Like, I'm a big whale hunter. I spearfish in residential. I say it because there's a lot of fishes, right? But the big deals are incredibly sexy, incredibly attractive, but they take so long, and they probably will never come, right? And so that was my hunting theme. And so I was like, I want a big one. So I started leveraging my network, and I found a client who owned a hotel. And at that time, I found a buyer, and I was doing the deal. At the time, it was 15 million, and it was classic, old school versus new school. It never worked together, and it fell apart on my birthday, August 26, 2020. And I'm working out, and my wife and I are trying to enjoy my birthday, and because I had to go work out. I was so angry, and we were at like a little hotel resort here in town. And I was like, man, I got to survive. I got to save this deal. So I contact our network, and I found my teammate. He was a comrade with me, and he was a big broker in Dallas. That's Mark Allen. Definitely recommend to get him on, because he has such an incredible stuff to offer, his experience and so forth. And I was like, hey, man, I know you can get this Dallas money to Colorado Springs, right? Dallas is an incredible market. And he's like, yeah, give me the situation. I was like, hey, it's a hotel, and they want to convert it to apartment. Do you have any buyers? And literally in 5 minutes, Mark's like, I remember I met this individual. He does hotel conversions at this conference. Hey, boom. So he set it up. And so it was my turn now to make this happen. And unfortunately, immediately I got this new buyer to offer on the hotel. It didn't work out. He's like, nope, it's not the criteria. And I'm like, well, this is horrible. But remember, I said, chase the objection. Why is it not? Right? Tell me why. Help me understand why this isn't blah, blah, blah. And he did. He gave me the exact criteria. So he wanted hundreds of units, right? He wanted a certain price per door. He wanted amenities to complement the building so it feels more homey, more as an apartment. And so it needed to be more of an extended stay hotel. So he gives me this laundry list, and right? And so like in the Army, they teach you like, hey, make sure you have your pen and notebook out, right? And so I'm just writing it down. And so I literally was like, okay, well, I got to go search for this. And I looked through all the databases to find the right hotel, and there was only one. And it was Hotel Elegante, and it was literally the third largest hotel in the state. And it's so funny because if you've been to Fort Carson, right? And if you've seen this, you see the hotel every day. It's right off I-25. And I'm like, how has this never been asked to sell? And then I was like, well, in commercial real estate, you always have to solidify the listing side. So you have to have value to the buyers, because usually in commercial real estate, the clients are sophisticated. So they're like, why do I need you? I could go and get it myself. They think they can, right? They think they can. They could definitely underwrite it, but that doesn't mean they can broker it. And so brokering is purely negotiations, right? And so I literally made the phone call of my life, right, to call their company, right, who owned the property. And I would be, my personality, sir. I like to be very charismatic, very dynamic, very passionate. Some people don't like that, but I like to be that extreme because I feel like life is too short. So, why not deliver as much enthusiasm as possible? And so literally I called and said, hey, I got an offer. Who do I give it to? And they're like, well, what do you mean? It's not for sale. I'm like, no. Have you checked with your approving authority? Has he said he's not interested in selling? The Army, right? Get back to like, well, you're not, you got to see who's in charge, right? And so they had an acquisition director, and I was like, no, I need to get this offer immediately, right? So it goes into communication. How are you presenting it? The tonality, being deliberate. And they were sophisticated. And they're like, okay, this young guy came out of nowhere, and I came legitimate, right? I always include my resume. I'm very professional. I speak the language. I know how to underwrite. I know what everything means. And so they're like, okay, give me a second. We'll see what happens. And I had a price in mind already. And because I know the math, I'm legitimate. And literally it was like, by the grace of God, they're like, we're interested. And I was like, okay, now I have to secure a letter of intent from the buyer to show proof, right? But at the same time, I got to get a listing contract. So before we got under contract, the seller did not like the buyer's letter of intent. Didn't like who they were, only liked the price. Wasn't a fan of the terms, was concerned because of the interest. And I'll get into it, because when there was that stalemate in getting under contract, I had to literally take a red eye, because it's so funny. In the way, I think I'm going to talk a lot about communication, because in this day and age, everything's done by text, right? Everything's done by email. We're removing the person out of it, and we're trying to put the technology behind it. And I feel like with the higher price points you go, or the more dramatic the deal is, the more it's important for the person to still be there. And so I was like, you know what? We're not going nowhere. I'm going to see you tomorrow morning. Can we do that? And they're like, you're coming here to Texas? I was like, yeah, I'm going to take a red eye. And so literally took the red eye, met them, and I met the seller. And what was amazing is that that's where relationship comes in. You are going there not to do the deal. You're going there to make the relationship. And so if you really think about that, I think that will change everyone's dynamic and how they communicate the deal and how they negotiate. I literally investigated everything about this seller. I knew his wedding anniversary. I knew every deal he did. I knew he was a Marine, right? Set up commonality. I knew everything. And every time I spoke with him, I somehow tied it to his history. And the moment you do that, you're literally satisfying trust. And so, and within relationship, to make it easier, if you listen well, right? If you're truly listening to their interests, you're good at your job, and you care, you have answered all the trust. Like, that's all you have to do is those three things to really develop that relationship, because the relationship's based on trust. So he knew I listened because I researched him. And then when we had the engagement, his interest was that, listen, I'm a Christian man. I know I can make money, but I'm incredibly sensitive to the sale of the hotel. You know why? Because I have 100+ of staff, right? We're in a pandemic. Doesn't this look like I'm being selfish to sell, right? Yes, I have other responsibilities, but I need to be very sensitive to the timeline, and I need to make sure that this is as quiet as possible, that this can move as quick as possible, and that we could not become this big marketing press release, because the market at the time was emotional. Regardless, he loved me. He gave me his trust, and I took it. And we made the deal eventually work. And that's a whole nother saga of like all the concessions and all the options and what happened. And we can hit on those, but that's pretty much the genesis of this, and we haven't even started the deal, right? Isn't it crazy? Right? So that's what I talked about. Like, the 7-element preparation tool applies to all the timelines. There was a pre-contract timeline. So, sorry. Yeah.
Hey, Brian, that was an awesome story, man. Really appreciate it. I mean, incredible work for you and the team. Great job all around. I'm glad to hear about your success. It's really awesome. And thinking about how negotiations really played a role in that success, I mean, it's even better. What I want to ask you now is kind of what's next for you, and make sure that you let the listeners know, whoever has $25 million to go buy a hotel, where they need to find you and get in touch with you. So.
Yeah, I mean, what's next? I would say, like, I can't stop. I have this desperation to continue giving back, because that's one of the things. Like, life is so short, where it's like, what do you do after this? Like, what do you do after a big sale like this, right? And the only way is to really give back, and you give back to the world. I'm telling you, it comes back like tenfold. And so I'm going to continue that. I'm going to continue adding value to the Colorado Springs landscape, now through commercial. My wife and I are pretty confident that we're already doing that in residential here in the city. But, commercial is where you really change the landscape, right? Retail, restaurants, hospitality, service industry, office, right? That's where you change like the dynamic of a city. Keep giving back. Like, sir, you talked about you should write a book. So I've just been writing all my experiences down, and I call it sales as service. And it's like a military application, right? Because when I was getting out, there was no like handbook to get into real estate, right? But I'm like, we're so valuable because of just the investment the Army gave. So I'm just taking that application from great leaders like yourself who taught me negotiations and applying that. And then, keep leveraging the network and adding value to our West Point network. I believe that, we're going to change the world through real estate, and it's going to be by West Pointers. And yeah, that's biased, but I think every professional should have that. They should have some sort of alma mater, some sort of tribe that they believe is going to change the world. So that's definitely what I'm going to do next. No, I'm blessed to meet people like you. I mean, sir, I hope people really see this example of us. Like, I was student cadet, right, to now, like, father and kids, and there's people instrumental in people's lives, right? And I want people to understand that, like, you don't make it by yourself, right? And it's something I can't thank you enough. And anything you need. And so, like, I was talking to Nolan, and I'm gonna figure out how to blow this up, and make it even bigger. And to answer your email, like, you know, I thought you were alluding to like, hey, let's figure out how to disrupt the real estate industry. And like I was saying, there's so many gurus out there that focus on the marketing. They're not focusing on the engagement. Does that make sense? You know, marketing is kind of like the bait that hangs, right? And then, you know, and usually, the consumer's just gonna eat it, and then they're pretty much already made a decision, right? Because, you know, but really, I mean, it's in the negotiation that just creates so much value. And I think it's something you guys should just, you know, that's a new customer or a new account or a new audience, you know, is like, you know, we got to pull in because there's so many transactions in real estate. And but I don't want it to make it like a real estate podcast, but just something to consider.
That's awesome, man. Well, you know, this is a podcast that is all about taking action to really help elevate your influence through purposeful negotiations. And I think one of the key takeaways that I have from listening to you today, Brian, was when you had talked about the importance of the relationship and the legitimacy and working these extended deals. You know, I think that for you to have built a relationship so that the seller is now on your team after already finding the buyer, I mean, that's pretty powerful. So I'll definitely take that as something that, you know, I can always improve on, is building that relationship even stronger to be more effective negotiator. And so I'll turn it over to Aram to see what kind of takeaways you had.
Yeah, there's so many, Nolan. I just encourage listeners to go back through whether or not you're involved in real estate. There are lessons that Brian shared today that apply in every aspect of life, everywhere where you're trying to negotiate or influence with folks. If you are, you know, looking for an agent, I love, Brian, what you shared about the importance of consistency and delivering that, the importance of being refreshing along the path, reminding people of their end state, the discipline with an endurance. And folks, if you're looking for a real estate agent, I think those are things you want to look for. If somebody's going to represent you, those are very valuable qualities to have, and somebody who's going to represent you, negotiate on your behalf, understand your interests, and take the time. And again, there's so many other things I feel like I could go to. The communication sprinkled throughout the process you described, the ability to listen really well, to understand interests, get creative, just so much, Brian. And you know, you said, and I'm going to pass this back to Nolan in a second, but you said, you know, you feel strong about delivering as much enthusiasm as you can. Every interaction I have with you, you do that. You certainly have today. And just thanks again for taking the time to be on the show with us. Greatly appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us, Brian. We really appreciate it, and appreciate everybody listening. You can catch us in the next episode. Hey, thanks for checking out this video on NegotiateX TV. If you found any value at all, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. And then we also have a couple videos over here that you might be interested in checking out. If you and your small business, your team, are looking to get negotiations or leadership training, then you can head over to negotiatex.com and learn more about the coaching services we offer. Thanks, and I'll see you over in the next video.